We are going to cross live now to Israel, where I'm joined by Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Olmert, thank you so much for your time. I want to get your view on some of the disturbing revelations that we've learned through an investigation that's been published today by the New York Times. I dare say it wouldn't be news to you that sexual violence was part of a broader pattern in gender-based violence that was perpetrated on Israeli women and girls during the October 7 attacks. But do you think that anything will change the minds of so many people that seem determined to deny the atrocities of October 7?
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised, obviously. I'm fully aware of all these details which were published by the New York Times. We knew it from day one. The reason why it took so much time to publish it is because there were so many doubts voiced in different parts of the world, part of the very effective indoctrination of anti-Semitic circles in different countries that casted doubt as to the accuracy and to the authenticity of what we said about the sexual assaults against Israelis, ladies mostly, of course. But not only, during the 7th of October. So I think it needed kind of an objective investigation by one of the most prestigious papers in the world to verify what we were saying. Now, where does it come from? Where does it come from? It certainly comes from indoctrination, hatred of the worst possible kind, and also the fact that they probably in the way of life of certain circles amongst these organizations. I'd be very careful not to generalize it into all the Muslims, all the Palestinians, and all the Arabs. That will not be true. But in certain circles, these kind of attacks against women and females is something that characterizes their attitude and their ways of life. And I think that this is, in their way, a certain, perhaps ultimate expression of the dominance and the humiliation that they wanted to impose on the Israeli victims.
It's a highly disturbing news to hear. Of course, many of us had heard these reports before, but you're right, having a masthead like the New York Times, which isn't exactly known for being friendly towards Israel, maybe will give some people who are determined not to believe it some new, maybe add extra weight, I'm not sure. I want to ask you, we're hearing reports that the head of Mossad is briefing Israel's war cabinet on a new development in hostage negotiations. Apparently this is different from previous proposals. It's a Qatari proposal. And the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, won't elaborate on it, but he says he is still working towards the goal of bringing home all the hostages. Do you know anything about this Qatari proposal? And do you think that Mr. Netanyahu's goal is still realistic?
Well, I'm sure that it would be of great significance if I could tell you what exactly is the goal of Netanyahu. I'm not sure I know, and I'm not certain that he knows what he really wants. Obviously, of course, everyone wants all the hostages to be released as soon as possible. I think that we have reached, and I don't know, I have to be very transparent with you, I don't know what Mr. Banea, the head of Mossad, reported to the cabinet, and quite frankly, even had I known, I'd be very careful not to share it, because it's so delicate and so sensitive and so fragile that for the sake of saving the hostages, we need to be very careful, very, very, very careful, and to refrain from referring to any specific details, but quite frankly, I don't know. I know what I think needs to be done at this point, and I have spelled it out in an article this morning in a prestigious Israeli paper, Haaretz, which is the equivalent of New York Times in Israel, in which I say that I think we have reached a point where we have to stop the fighting and to have a deal that will bring over all of the hostages back to Israel. In as long as we actually can bring all the hostages live and dead, bodies of, because we know there are bodies. Now, the point is this. I think that we have to stop at this point, bring them back, because I'm afraid that in as long as we will wait, we may get back at the end only bodies and not living hostages. So if we have to balance it at this delicate point, we have to bear the possible humiliation of making a compromise that will stop at this point the military operations, not just for 3 days, 4 days, will stop the military operations. However, number one, all of the hostages will be back, and the bodies of all the Israelis held will be back into the Israeli hands, and also the military force of Israel will remain in place, will not withdraw, will remain in place, and Israel will declare that we are prepared to start negotiations for the future of Gaza with the Palestinians that will be mediated and brokered by Egypt. We trust Egypt. Egypt is very close to the different Palestinian factions, but also has proved to be a very trustworthy partner of the State of Israel. And I think that they are anxious to bring it to some point where the military confrontations from both sides will end. So at this point, return of all the hostages, the armies remain in place wherever they are at the day of at the moment of the declaration of ceasefire, and we are stopping the military operations. We are embarking on negotiations for the future of Gaza. If that will happen, it will be short of what Israel has declared at the beginning will be the goal of the military operation, although I think that the Hamas has suffered an unbelievable blow to the infrastructure, to their fighting force. I mean, they lost thousands of the soldiers and the fighters. They lost their command positions, their infrastructure, the launching pads in various parts of Gaza. It's a very severe blow, perhaps not as much as we wanted, but if I have now, at this very tragic point, to assess the chances that the hostages will not be back against the early end to the military operation, I have to prefer the lives of our hostages.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like something, maybe the Egypt peace proposal is the one that you think might be the most successful. I just want to ask you quickly, before we run out of time, our own foreign minister in Australia, Penny Wong, is set to visit Israel next year. Now, there's been reportedly a bit of a strained relationship with Israel after Mr. Netanyahu didn't return our Prime Minister's calls for 2 weeks after October 7, and then the vote from Australia in the United Nations for a ceasefire that was praised by Hamas. You've no doubt seen reports of some of the anti-Semitic incidents that have been happening here and the travel warning from Israel not to come to Australia or to take great caution. How do you think that visit's going to go? Can the relationship with Australia be, I guess, repaired?
To be very honest with you, I was disappointed myself with some of the expressions coming from Australia over the last couple of months from political leaders. But substantially, fundamentally, the relations between the Australian people and the State of Israel were so good. I've been friendly with so many of your prime ministers, and I know how much they feel and care for the State of Israel. So I hope that the Australian Prime Minister will make a somewhat reassessment of the attitude that was spelled out from Australia towards the State of Israel. And in any event, if he comes to Israel, he needs to be received in the most appropriate, polite, and friendly manner, because I'm certain that even though, as I said, we heard some very unfriendly expressions and there were some riots in Australia in the streets of Sydney, which were absolutely obnoxious. I mean, talking about Jews to be sent into the gas chambers, terrible, terrible. For me, particularly as a friend of Australia and someone that visited so many times Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra and Perth and all of your cities, and I love this country, it was very hard to absorb. So I hope that while the Prime Minister of Australia comes to Israel, there will be a new government in Israel and we will restore the good relations, and that you will rethink again about some of the expressions of restraint and perhaps unfriendly that were made in Australia towards the state of Israel. I'm not certain that
you might have to wait a while, Mr. Olmert, because Mr. Albanese, our Prime Minister, hasn't expressed any intention to go to the Middle East anytime soon. He is sending, though, his Foreign Minister, who made those expressions of restraint you referred to. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off there. Ehud, Olmert, thank you so much for your time.